Good evening, and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. Returning is friend of the show and frequent co-host Alex Suarez. And our special guest tonight is Lee Camp. How are you guys doing tonight?
Hanging in there. How about you?
I'm doing great. Alex, how are you doing?
Good. It's truly an honor to co-host the show for one of my heroes, a true journalist activist, Lee Camp. We first met back at the defense of the Venezuelan embassy in 2019. And, I had the pleasure of, seeing him once again when I was back in DC a couple months shy of COVID. And it's really great to be back in touch with him, have him back on here, especially since the ongoing censorship. So, yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here.
Thanks.
And we appreciate you being able to join us, Lee. Thanks. I know Alex had some questions.
Yeah, we need no big introduction for you, Lee, because most of our listeners are big fans of you. So I wanted to go in and ask you a couple things. Yeah,
my listeners probably know Lee better than they know me.
Hey, that rhymes. What I was saying last show is, well, if we ever bring Lee on, it's too bad I didn't bring a wig because both of y'all got long hair. And, I had to grow mine a little longer to match you guys. So
that's all right. You're beating us on the mutton chops. So.
Yeah. I always got the sideburns.
I have the old Bakunin thing going on.
Oh, yeah. Got some gray hairs there.
That too.
Well, anyways, besides your show that was censored on Spotify shortly before the shutting down of RT America, I wanted to get into, well, first off, I wanted to mention, in case a lot of people aren't familiar with the other hosts on RT America, besides Lee, of course, Lee was very popular and justifiably so. There was a couple of late American journalists that were on RT America, very respected, like Larry King, Ed Schultz. And when RT shut down, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Chris Hedges was thrown off, Jesse and Terrell Ventura. So it wasn't just Lee. And so first off, Lee, you're a real red-blooded American. Are you descended from a couple of the founders?
Yeah. My family's descended from, I guess the most direct one is John Marshall. We're part of the John Marshall family. Still my father's middle name is Marshall. My older brother's name is Marshall. But we're also descended from George Washington. We've got, Nellie Washington was, I guess, his niece, and hand towels were, for the elite back then were far nicer than I think a hand towel is today. And so they would sign them and kind of had their like personal elite hand towel. So we have her hand towel framed on our wall at home. But the most important person I'm descended from is my great grandfather is Walter Camp, who basically created American football. So that's the real one. Yeah.
I didn't know about that one.
My wife, perfect microcosm of the American experience. My wife's father comes from a family named Orcutt that came over on the Mayflower.
Wow.
And
I heard that Hemingway was related to John Hancock.
And my wife's mother's family was, of course, Polish American, grandchild of immigrants.
Right.
So the quintessential American experience on one side and the other. But
yeah,
me,
Lee, just so you know, Chris and I we're big history buffs. And we to go off on tangents, and we love history, and we respect history. It's part of the reason why we were asking you about that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I do. I've gotten more into history recently, like the past probably 10 years. And, and the real history, not the fake stuff you get in our high schools here in America and our middle schools. But I do a podcast called Government Secrets, where each week we go over kind of the hidden side of American history. Some of it not so hidden, some of it more hidden, but things like the fact that George Washington was one of the 10 richest Americans at the time. And so really the American Revolution was elite versus elite. It was the elite Americans basically saying they didn't want to pay taxes and didn't want to be ruled over by the elite monarchy in Britain. So this idea that it was like, I mean, the poor fought the war, as with all wars, but the idea that it was just, these young little upstarts who came from nothing. It's like, no, it was still the elite.
The founding fathers were like, I mean, and if I'm doing my math right, obviously it's approximate, but 99 really rich guys, one poor bastard from the Caribbean, that's Alexander Hamilton.
Yep.
And one proto-communist in Thomas Paine.
Don't you wish sometimes they would bring back?
Thomas Paine was the best of the bunch.
Yes.
Yeah, he wrote Common Sense, but don't you think that they should? I'm joking, of course, but don't you think sometimes they should bring back the duels? Because that's how they got rid of Alexander Hamilton.
So
it's so the duels are so hilariously stupid. All the rules of if you have honor, then you shoot your bullet in the air. And what is it? Didn't one of them wear a big coat because he was hoping the bullet would miss and go through the coat?
This is before the bulletproof vest.
Well, there was when Teddy Roosevelt. This is a true story. When Teddy Roosevelt was shot before the first and last speech he gave on his presidential campaign, he was shot in the breast pocket his speech was tucked into. And it is very likely that he survived the gunshot wound because the speech slowed down the bullet.
Well, that was a pretty lengthy speech then.
Well, it was pages upon pages. I don't know how big he wrote.
But then there was another president who died due to the length of the speech, right? The one that served like a week or something and died because his inaugural
record or something.
His inaugural speech was so long.
William Henry Harrison gave a 2-hour inaugural address, still the longest on record, and died of pneumonia a month later.
Oh, God. So that was a contributing factor, yeah. Well, anyways, my next question for you, Lee, is you still have Common Censored that you do with Eleanor Goldfield. That's on is that on Spotify as well, or?
Yeah, that and Government Secrets are still on Spotify. The one that was deleted.
What was the one that was censored? Yeah,
was called Moment of Clarity, which I've had the longest. Yeah. I've had that one for 10 or 12 years or something. And
right.
But yeah, it all happened at the same time. They deleted that podcast off Spotify. All the old YouTube videos of Redacted Tonight are banned globally. And of course, the show shut down. All that simultaneous. And hilariously, they also started putting Russian state affiliated media on a bunch of people's Twitter accounts. They didn't do it on mine, but they put it on Ed Schultz's account, who's been dead for 4 years.
Post-mortem. I mean, that's just despicable. They would.
It's lucky they didn't tag Larry King's account like that. I probably didn't have one, but. Yeah. But I mean,
it is such an
Larry
insane.
King died actually more recently than Ed Schultz did. He died from COVID, so he quite possibly has a Twitter. I haven't looked it up.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an insane level of censorship, all to happen at once, and obviously it continues. They're not done. By the way, there are supposed to be articles coming out. I mean, I haven't looked or kept up with them, but basically they've tried to get interviews with me and others from RT, and their goal is to now get us banned from any other platforms we may go to try and continue to make a living or continue to do what we do. You basically report the
blacklisting.
Yeah, so they're trying to get us, deleted from, I have a new Patreon that I created to try and recreate Redacted Tonight or have a show, patreon.com/Lee Camp. So they're going off after our other platforms, trying to get us deleted from other things because they're not done. Getting our shows shut down wasn't enough. So.
It's a new McCarthyism.
We talk about McCarthyism all the time, but that's the actual blacklist coming back.
Right. That's what it is. The Russophobia and all of that, the hysteria, the covering up. I think a lot of stuff to do with the extent that they're trying to cover up the fascist and neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine. They're just trying to show one narrative. Like I was on RT International once. It had nothing to do with Ukraine. They interviewed me a couple years ago after I was tear gassed in Jacksonville here in Florida when I was protesting with BLM. And I thought, well, they just went after RT America. I'll still be able to see my interview on RT America. I mean, on RT International. That was taken down too. So this is what they're doing. They did it in the EU. Now they're doing it here in the US. And so my next question for you, Lee, is: has this? I mean, it obviously has. So like the personal toll that's been on you since you've had to stop working with RT America. If you could tell people a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I don't want to act like I'm the saddest story in America. There are, millions of people struggling, poor, facing eviction. 15 million people behind on their rent could be evicted any day now. So I certainly understand that it's a privilege to complain that my TV show got shut down. But that being said, people want to know what it is, and it's kind of crazy to see 8 years of work. I wrote all my words myself. Obviously, there's amazing correspondents that worked on the show for their segments, but I wrote all my stuff myself, researched it, was never censored, was never told what to say, and it's 375 episodes redacted tonight, over 500 if you count the interview show as well, and all of it for now, and I think probably forever, banned on YouTube, is just really disgusting to wipe away 8 years of work like that. It really is repulsive. So, I am trying to continue on. I have this Patreon, and if I get enough...
I saw the interview, by the way, you did with Abby Martin. I want to mention she worked for RT at one point as well. That was an excellent interview.
Yeah, and all of her stuff's banned as well.
All of her RT stuff.
Yeah, all
she
of her...
Telesur. I've been to Venezuela, Lee, so Telesur is an important network for me. It's funded by progressive Latin American governments. She worked for Telesur, and they didn't shut Telesur down, but the sanctions resulted in the Telesur stations in the United States having to be shut down, and she lost her show then. And this is what they're doing against alternative voices that don't follow that imperialist narrative.
Yeah, and it really is not. This is not the first time. This is maybe one of the larger times, but me and Chris Hedges have kind of been chased around having our outlet shut down. Chris has one more on me. He was forced out of the New York Times basically because he came out against the Iraq War. So he was kicked out of there. Then both he and I were two of the biggest writers at Truthdig. Truthdig was essentially shut down by the publisher because she didn't like that we were revealing the truth about Russiagate. She specifically wanted me and Chris kicked off the platform, and Robert Scheer refused to do it. So you see that you report the truth, you report the reality behind the mainstream media garbage, and you will become a pariah. You will be attacked, and you will be taken off of the main outlets and main networks. And many of us have called this. We said this was coming. We said they're not just going to go after the right wingers. They're going to come for the leftists as well. And here we are.
They never actually did go after the right.
I know, a lot of them.
Individual people
called
upon them to go after the right wing.
It wasn't as massive as against us on the left.
And they ignored the voice of the people and left the right wingers alone.
Well, even Phil Donahue, who was the most popular.
Everybody associated with Russia as soon as Russia invaded.
But let's go back to the Iraq War, because you mentioned Chris Hedges when he worked for New York Times. Even Phil Donahue, who had the most popular show, and was taken off just for trying to bring a debate about the Iraq War. And I wanted to ask you just a couple more things. I know Chris has questions for you as well, Lee. I know we have limited time. Recently, there's been threats by a Zionist group in London to kick the Arab British rapper Low Key off Spotify for his pro-Palestine views. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, he's great. He does great work. He works for Mint Press, an outlet I love a lot. And they're trying to, and unlike me, his music is his main career and main source of income. So they're trying to get that kicked off Spotify, which is, again, it's repulsive. Many have spoken out about it against this new purge of, calling it anti-Semitism when it's not at all. And I'm Jewish, but calling out Israel on their war crimes, on their apartheid state, is not anti-Semitism. It's just a fact, and it is standing up for the oppressed, and that's what Loki does. And for that, he's being attacked.
Well, yes, he has a lot of Jewish progressive friends. I'm part Jewish myself. To call him anti-Semitic is absurd. And so anyways, you see the picture here of Assange I have on my wall. I had to ask you about Assange. Chris Hedges recently at his wedding in Belmarsh. I saw your interview with his father and brother, who I met before that when they were in Miami, before they went to Washington, D.C. with John and Gabriel Shipton. What's your opinion about the odds of him being extradited at this point? I know that one of his last appeals was shot down.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look good. It does look like the British state is doing everything they can to bend over backwards for America, which is the actual, the actual source of his torture, his imprisonment, for being the most reliable, most accurate journalist and publisher that's ever lived. Nothing WikiLeaks has ever reported has been false, completely blowing out of the water any other media outlet. And yet here he is, someone that should have statues made of himself, is in prison, and it's not looking good. I mean, they're very close to extraditing him, and we know from past whistleblowers and past publishers who have been prosecuted under the Espionage Act that whistleblowers. I guess they haven't gone after a publisher yet until now, but we know that they won't get a fair trial. He won't get a fair trial at all. They never do. Chelsea Manning didn't, although hers was a military trial, but John Kiriakou didn't for revealing the CIA's torture program.
I bet Kiriakou, he's a gentleman, yeah.
Yeah, and none of them get a fair trial. They're not even allowed to bring in any evidence to show why they did what they did or anything like that. So it's a complete banana republic, and a kangaroo court, all of the fruit and animal terms you can come up with. It's completely disgusting. And
the origin of that term is the United Fruit Company, which was owned by the brother of the head of the CIA. They tried to establish.
It goes back even before that. The first banana republic was Nicaragua, not the Nicaragua we think of in the 1980s.
Oh, yes, you're right. That was before the CIA. That's correct.
But Woodrow Wilson, the reason Woodrow Wilson did not want to initially get involved with World War I was because he was already fighting a war in Central America for Chiquita banana.
That's correct.
That's who they are now. They
used to be called United Fruit, but yes, they were all the same company.
And so the term Banana Republic comes from when the very first time was when Teddy Roosevelt made Panama a country. Teddy Roosevelt invaded Panama.
They split it from Colombia, yeah.
Yes, they invaded Panama in support of Colombian rebels and then said, the rebels get the country, sorry. And the Colombians were very quick to surrender and make peace with the rebels after the U.S. invaded, because what are you going to do? And Panama became the first banana republic. Teddy Roosevelt basically chose the winner of the election. Obviously,
most judges in Venezuela. Let's talk about today, though. Most judges in Venezuela today belong to the opposition, as does most of the media. I was just there last year as an election observer, and so people today on the right, they say banana republic. They think of countries like Venezuela right now, and that's just not reality. And then voices like Lee that are saying, hey, look at the hypocrisy of the London courts that are supposed to be the best in Europe and how they're handling Assange. They're really acting that way, not a lot of those progressive American governments, right?
Every historical banana republic has one thing in common. Like that first one Teddy Roosevelt put in power. They were all put in power by Americans.
Exactly. They think like, oh, it's the third world doing it to themselves. No, it's the imposition of U.S. imperialism.
Yeah.
Well, Guatemala elected Arbenz, and the CIA gave them a junta that eventually invaded El Salvador and put a government they liked in charge in El Salvador, and we all know how that turned out.
And that coup alone inspired Che to become a revolutionary. He was a doctor working for Arbenz at that time. So, Lee, yeah, I mean, I'm sure Chris got actual questions for you. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, since you mentioned history and since the topic of Nazis in Ukraine always go together, how aware are you of Ukraine's deep history there?
I have not. I've studied a lot about Ukraine since about the 2014 Maidan coup, but I have not studied a lot before that.
So in 1929, a group called the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists was formed in the city of Lviv in what was then the Second Polish Republic. So Lviv was a Polish city when the Order of Ukrainian Nationalists was formed. This is very important to remember. Lviv was a Polish city when the Order of Ukrainian Nationalists was formed.
That's in the Galicia area, right?
Yes, Eastern Galicia, what's now Western Ukraine. They modeled themselves very deliberately on the German National Socialist Democratic Workers' Party. The Nazis. They deliberately modeled themselves on the Nazis. Their first order of business was not to strike some great terrorist blow against Poland for independence, their first order of business was to hunt down and assassinate as many liberal pro-Ukrainian independence politicians there were, so that there was no liberal or socialist opposition to them. They killed them first before they started going after Poles. And then
they went after Jews as well, man.
And well, that came later, but yes, they went after Jews as well. But in 1929, the group that became the mother and father of the modern Ukrainian independence movement was formed, deliberately copying the Nazis in their political organization. And that's before all the World War II stuff.
Yeah, because the Nazis didn't take power in Germany until 1932. So this is really early on.
Exactly. Stepan Bandera declared the Ukrainian Republic in 1941. And though Hitler promptly locked him up, his flunkies immediately started killing Poles and Jews and Liv.
Right, and he was later released and was working with the Germans. And this is who the regime in Kiev considers a hero, Bandera, even though he was a collaborator.
Well, and hilariously, PBS interviewed one of the mayors of one of the cities in Ukraine right now, and he had Stefan Bandera portrait behind him, and they tried to block it. Yeah. They tried to blur it out so that people wouldn't know, but everyone knew what it was anyway.
Yeah.
And it's like, why draw attention to it by blurring it out? Because then as somebody, I got to find out what they're blurring out.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest. Bandera was not a prepossessing person. Most people would not recognize Bandera by sight without his name under the picture. They probably caused themselves more trouble by blurring it out. I mean, somebody would have recognized.
I want to commend Lee on is his great exposing of the sanctions, which barely ever talked about in the media. The UN just a couple of years ago said that the U.S. sanctions have killed up to 100,000 Venezuelan civilians alone, and this is a population of only 28 million people. And of course, those numbers have risen since then as Biden maintained these sanctions. So I just want to commend you for that.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, we've tried to cover the harm of sanctions. I'd like to tell people to call it economic war and not sanctions, because sanctions sounds too nice. Sure. It sounds like it doesn't really cause harm. But as you're saying, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people are killed by sanctions. And I also try and remind people that who is it that dies or is most harmed by sanctions? It's going to inevitably be the poor, the sick, the babies, the elderly. I mean, it's a full-on attack on like literal babies in Venezuela. I mean, or Iran or Syria or North Korea.
And Ambassador Alex Saab tried to stop it. Ambassador Alex Saab tried to stop it, and they kidnapped him on Cape Verde Island under Trump, and now he's being held down in Miami. I was at his hearing the other day. This is what they do against heroes who try to use diplomacy to fight U.S. sanctions.
Yeah, most people don't know. We have we have multiple, but we have a literal political prisoner right here in the U.S. right now that we kidnapped from Venezuela.
Oh yeah, that too, but also Donziger. Yeah, he's an American. So they're going after, anybody that fights the corporations.
Well, I mean, how long has Leonard Peltier been in prison now?
Yeah.
He's the AIM leader, American Indian Movement.
The sanctions on Russia right now are going to make the oligarchs they're targeting richer as the price of oil goes up.
Yeah.
While the Russian people are the only people actually being hurt. So the oligarchs they say they want to sanction are going to get richer as a result of these sanctions.
It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most idiotic move right now. The U.S. wants to continue, and I assume you've talked about this, but they want to continue this war as much as possible in Ukraine. Yes. It's using Ukrainians as cannon fodder in a proxy war, and the sanctions they're putting on Russia seem to already beginning to be backfiring. It's going to harm Europe immensely. It's going to harm the average and poor Americans immensely. And it's both idiotic and just completely immoral, everything that's being done by our government. But instead you have your average American running around with a Ukrainian flag out front their home or on their Facebook or whatever, because they think that means they care for innocent civilians. But in fact, it's garbage they're being fed. But
Well, I mean, to be fair, I've been watching videos, and the Ukrainians, or rather, I should be very specific, the Ukrainian Nazis fighting the Russians in Mariupol and other places have been using civilians as human shields. I mean, and you hate to say something like that, because Israeli propaganda has made every accusation of that sound like it must be a lie, because Israel says about Hamas. But it's true. You can see it in the videos. They were using the hospital that they made such
not
a big
just the videos, the witness testimony. There's people that have come forward. I've watched the videos in Russian, and they said we just escaped, and they were holding us as human shields. They're all saying the same thing.
Well, the hospital that was evacuated, that was attacked in Mariupol, was evacuated approximately 2 days before it was attacked.
Right.
While it was empty, because it's the safest place. This is why there were remarkably few injured and only 4 people killed when the one person wounded died after. Because it's the safest place, civilians have been using the basements of abandoned hospitals as bomb shelters. And the Nazis were deliberately using these abandoned buildings with knowing there were civilians in the basement, using them as bomb shelters and shooting at the Russians from these buildings, so that the Russians, who don't know who's in the basement, shoot back, and they can say, oh, look, civilian casualties.
The way that the forces are going in, it's not going to be to occupy the nation. I don't think that's Putin's objective. And, Chris and I have condemned the invasion, as well as you, Lee. We're in no way defending the invasion of Ukraine. We're just saying that this is the reality. The way they're going about it, they're not really interested in occupying the nation. They're trying to demilitarize it. And the regular forces of the Ukrainian army that surrender have been treated humanely. It's the Nazi groups, the extreme groups that are going to Mariupol. Those are the ones that they're harsh on.
Yeah, and people don't want to look into the even recent history that Russia had said again and again that Ukraine needed to declare it was neutral and would not join NATO, and the United States made sure that would never happen. And again, Russia said this must happen in order for this to not get a lot worse. And so eventually they did what I think some people didn't think would happen, which is invade Ukraine in order to stop it from joining NATO and stop it from being just a full-on Nazi state at their border. Most people don't remember that the Soviet Union at the time lost 27 million people to Nazis, so they're not really huge fans there. And
that's just the wartime statistic.
Well, I heard up to 1.6 million Jews were killed in Ukraine by collaborators or by Nazis. That's out of the 2 million Soviet Jews that comes from the 6 million figure. And Americans aren't told this. It's covered up. They don't show the history of collaboration and all that.
Well, there's we still celebrate Captive Nations Week officially. The list of captive nations has changed since the Cold War ended, but we still officially celebrate Captive Nations Week. And Captive Nations Week started because the CIA had inherited a bunch of anti-Soviet Nazi collaborators from the Nazis and wanted to use them for propaganda purposes.
In Munich, especially, right, in West Germany, that's where they took up Bandera later on.
Well, yeah, the anti-Bolshevik bloc of nations and the World Anti-Communist League were based in Munich. The anti-Bolshevik bloc of nations was run by Yaroslav Stetsko, who was Bandera's deputy during the war, stayed with him in Sachsenhausen in the VIP section of the concentration camp. So even when they were locked up, Bandera and Stetsko were important enough that they weren't in the general population of the concentration camp with the people being killed. They were in the VIP prisoners section with the.
It's like that scene in Goodfellas with the mobsters where they could have that little room for themselves. Yeah.
If you've ever watched a movie about English,
like Pablo Escobar's prison.
It's like It's like debtor's prison. If you've ever seen a Victorian or if you've ever seen a movie about Georgian highwaymen, you see debtor's prisons, and you see the criminals all around in these horrible, horrible conditions, while the rich debtors are sitting here just, gorging. They're in prison because they're not paying their debts, but they can afford to have all this expensive stuff brought into them. So the rich people are just like partying in prison, while the poor people are literally dying in prison all around them.
I do have to run, guys, but I really do appreciate you having me on. And
I have one question I do want to ask before you go, and this is just because I promised one of my guests last week that I would ask it, which is, are you still associated in any way with the Movement for a People's Party?
I'm still good friend with some of the people there, and I think a lot of them are very genuine people that are working hard to try and do things such as give everyone health care, and you can have issues with this or that thing that's been done,
Sure.
but I the ones that I know, and I know many of them are very genuine, hardworking people. So I think there have been missteps. I don't follow the play-by-play every day. There've been, well, let me just finish. There's been missteps, but I think a lot of what's been said is not true, and some of it may be true. But I think people should be careful what they just assume is true because it sounds bad and must be true.
Well, I mean,
I want to give a shout out before Lee goes real quick from Comrade K in Ontario. He's another good alternative journalist. And I just want to say before you go, Lee, that, I'm sick and tired of my heroes being persecuted either by losing their jobs, being censored, or what's going on with Assange. And I really look forward to keeping in touch with you. I hope to be back in Washington, D.C. sometime soon. It's really been a pleasure having you on.
Hey, man, that's really kind to you. And I'm glad you guys are doing what you do, and keep at it. And, yeah, so my people can follow my stuff at patreon.com/Lee Camp, but keep fighting. Thanks, guys.
Have a great night.
Peace, brother.
Perfect.
Yeah, I kind of agree with him what he said about MPP, because when we said it on the show, we're not MPP bashers. We're not against the rank and file. There might be people there with good intentions that think that they could somehow, replace Nick's, but obviously there's a problem there, but that's not his focus, really. I think probably doesn't really care much about what's going on with MPP. His focus right now is exposing U.S. imperialism,
Sure, and I totally get that. I agree with Gira, the breakaway groups, not the Branas. The problem is that, as several people brought up the last time, and as I made sure to mention too the last time, is that Nick and his dad own the legal entity that is the MPP.
Right. A lot of the MPPers might not be aware of that, how difficult it is to replace them. I didn't even know that until we did that show. Yeah.
Yeah. And that makes a difference, though, because if it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there are good people in the organization, if Nick can always fire them. And if Nick
that's why I think we either need a new party or we need to go push the Greens more. But let's be honest here. I love the Greens, but they've been around in the United States since I was born, 1994, and they haven't made any ground. I don't necessarily blame the Greens for that. It's the laws. We got to start changing the laws and let independents and third-party people back in the debates.
Let's be totally honest. Mm-hmm. Because I have lots of problems with the Green Party. But one of the reasons that we need a united front against capitalism and fascism is if we want to have any sort of chance to make any sort of showing in liberal elections, we need the Green Party's ballot access. They're the only third party that has that level of ballot access, except for the Libertarian Party, which is a much harder sell, since they're specifically anti-socialist and anti-communist.
Right.
And so if your goal is not to contest elections, more power to you. I totally support a revolution. I'm there. But if you're
I had serious issues, and I'm not going to get into a lot of details on it, but I had serious issues with Greens in Florida. There was a lot of discrimination going on there. Like, there's a stereotype that Greens are upper class whites.
Yes.
And even Greens in South Florida and predominantly people of color areas, they wouldn't let speakers who were working class or people of color speak. They only wanted the upper class whites to speak. I said, then why are you perpetuating the stereotype on the party? And they said, we got to get rid of this guy. So there was some similar behavior in MPP as well that one of our guests talked about. So I'm not saying the Greens are or perfect or anything like that.
No.
But I do like their anti-capitalist platform that they adopted. But since 2017, I have not been part of the Greens anymore. I'm just an independent. So
And, I'm not part of the Greens either. I'm not saying that people need to go join the Greens. But what I am saying is that if your goal is to contest elections, you need the Green Party's ballot access. That's just a fact. It's shrinking, but you're not going to get the Green Party's ballot access.
You know what the problem was? How they framed open primaries in Florida recently, Chris? They made it where a Republican could enter the primary of a Democrat to sabotage the progressive.
Yes.
So you have to frame open primaries. I'm in favor of open primaries, but you have to frame it in a way where those types of sabotage can't happen.
Oh, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. And that's been a problem with the Greens. There was a period after Ralph Nader did so well in
Republicans have run as Greens, right? I mean, that they've corrupted
what happened in 2000, what happened after 2000 was the dominant group was this bunch that people called the Demo Greens, who were all determined not to let the Green Party get blamed for re-electing George Bush in 2004, and not to let the Green Party get blamed for electing John McCain in 2008. And so you had this period of 8 years where the Green Party essentially destroyed itself to help Democrats, even as Obama was destroying the Democrats to help himself.
Right.
And it's all very, very depressing.
Has there anybody written us any questions on the chat or the live chat on YouTube that we can answer for them?
There's some good comments. I'm going to go through for.
Oh yeah, like maybe you can show some comments and I can respond to them, or you can respond to them.
Oh yeah, this is a good one. This is actually a question. The last sanctions to harm an oligarch was.
Well, they stopped the boat from like one of the boats, him docking it or something.
They stole a bunch of yachts.
Yeah, they stole some yachts. That's like who knows where the money is. Epstein didn't really die. It's on the island where Epstein is. It was his double that was hanged, right?
But yeah, mostly they stole a bunch of yachts. I don't even think they had legitimate sanctions to steal the yachts. I think they just stole the yachts.
But it's symbolic. It's like, so he's going to buy another yacht. You're talking about billionaires. They'll get it back eventually anyways. And why aren't they talking about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all the American oligarchs? They're acting like if you're an oligarch, you have to be Russian.
They're not. So that's the whole thing, is they never call billionaires in the U.S. oligarchs. A lot of the Russian oligarchs aren't even billionaires. They're, you're fairly run-of-the-mill.
Actually, a lot of Putin's enemies are rich guys.
Oh, yeah.
That fund the far-right groups that actually like the Ukrainian regime. A lot of people protesting the war in Ukraine are not lefties. I think it's like 57% in the last poll I saw of Russians still support the war. But that minority that are opposed to the war, there is a number of far right guys that are funded by rich guys that Putin had went after and fined, and some of them turned from billionaire to millionaire as a result. So, and also in China, you know what they would do with their rich, corrupt bankers? They execute them.
Well, I know.
Well, in countries like Russia and China, they're not messing around when it comes to corruption a lot of times. We here in the U.S. will give them a raise if they do something corrupt.
Russia has its own corruption issue.
No, of course. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
Russia isn't corrupt.
I'm just saying, who are we to judge kind of thing,
Well, their kleptocracy is more open than ours. Their oligarchs are more directly involved in their politics than ours in an open way, as opposed to just money. But our oligarchs give a lot of money to Russian political parties, even as Russian oligarchs give a lot of money to the NRA and Republicans.
Yeah, but the U.S. meddles in Russia far more than Russian meddles here.
Well, so I mean, that's the thing.
That the far right party's U.S. friends.
I'm not talking about Russia. I'm talking about Russian oligarchs, which is a different thing.
Yeah, because a lot of them don't even live in Russia. You're right. A lot of them live in London, right? A lot of these oligarchs bought up a lot of real estate there.
Even the ones in Russia. I mean, there are people in Russia, oligarchs, who give a lot of money to right-wing causes in the U.S.
Interesting.
They give a lot of money because the Russian Orthodox Church has a lot of the same prejudices.
Wasn't this redheaded woman that got caught spying on the NRA for the Russians or something?
Yes, Maria Butina.
Yeah.
We may talk about her in a moment or two, because that's kind of fun here and there. But the
you said Butina, not Putina, right? Because if she was Putina, that would be the first lady. Because they put an A on the end, Putin's wife. Yeah,
Butina, Maria Butina.
Butina, all right. It also means something vulgar in Spanish, but we're not going to get into that.
No, well, I mean, I know what it means in Spanish.
With the P, it's something else. Yeah.
I grew up in Southern California.
Okay, you know those.
I know some words.
Right? Yeah.
I know the ones that get flung insults in schoolyards.
Those are the first words you learn in a foreign language, are the vulgar ones usually.
Well, I mean, in Southern California, and I imagine it's not terribly different in some parts of Puerto Rico and New York, depending on the neighborhoods.
What's the coolest thing about Lee is, he's a rock star. He's famous, at least when it comes to alternative media and leftists like us. But he's so down to earth, especially when you meet him. Like, I got to meet him a couple of times. He's really down to earth guy.
No, and that's good. That's good. I will say that if you're a serious activist and you're interested in something with the future, I do think that it's probably a good idea to stay away from Nick Brenna. Because as long as Nick Brenna is in charge, you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to get sent.
I think at this point, even Max Blumenthal, who's associated with the fascist truckers, if he runs into Brana in DC, because they both live in DC, and Brana's like, "Hey, let's take a picture together," Max is probably going to be like, I've met Max a couple of times too. He's going to probably be like, "No, thanks, Nick. I don't want to do that right now."
I don't know anything about Max Blumenthal personally. I will not speculate.
He does great journalism. I'm just saying that if he made some mistakes with the convoy for the truckers.
Well,
but I'm saying if he ran into Nick, Max is also smart. He would be like, no, thanks, Nick. I don't do that picture.
Here's where you've got. I'm going to challenge you there. I usually don't like to make this show about people, but I will go ahead and talk about a person now since you brought it up.
Okay.
So Max Blumenthal, which is he? Is he smart, or does he support the truckers?
It's not smart to support the truckers. I'm saying he's smart on other things.
No, I know. I get that. But this is where you really have to give some scrutiny to decisions.
Sure.
Because Max Blumenthal is not normally someone to make really stupid decisions for really superficial reasons.
Okay.
But that's exactly what supporting the truckers was.
He did change his mind about Assad. So when he showed evidence, he's capable of changing his mind. He might change his mind about the truckers.
We'll see.
We're both in disagreement with him on the vaccines. He
was very quick to jump on the anti-vax train.
Right. That was a problem.
And that is not something that people who are genuinely socialists or anarchists should be associating themselves with.
No, I agree. We should have Ben Norton on, because Ben Norton was his closest collaborator, and he split with them over the vaccines. He's no longer with the Grace.
When he quit, some of us were speculating about whether or not he would be fired. And when he quit, we were like, okay, well, maybe he was wondering too.
Right.
That's a good question. Is Cornell West still associated with MPP?
Somebody else I met, Cornell West.
I do not know if Cornell West is still associated with MPP or not.
He's not associated with the Greens anymore. He supported Bernie.
I know, I remember that. But that's the thing, though. I mean, he supported Bernie in 2016. He supported Bernie in 2020. He became involved with the MPP in early 2017 after Bernie had lost. And he became involved with the MPP again late 2020 when Bernie lost again. So it's a good question. Is he still associated with them?
I don't know. It depends on his posts. I don't know if I know Cornel West has Twitter. I believe I follow him. I don't know if he's posted any of their messages recently.
He was a member of the advisory council, like some other people, which was mostly ceremonial and official, but also tended to involve a lot of doing publicity for and boosting the MPP. I know Ryan Knight left. I know Jim.
We ought to get Lancelot on here sometime. I told you Lancelot. Well, I never said it on the program. I'll say it now because Lancelot already said he'd like to come on. Lancelot was my deputy when we were negotiating with the Spaniards to train NPP. And Lancelot left the movement shortly after they went after me. But he's actually one of the founding members from the very beginning. So Lancelot's somebody we'd want to get on if we want to investigate the NPP story further. Or we should really call it the Nick Brana story, because really it's his style of leadership that has caused all these problems, not the concept of starting a new party, which I still support.
Well,
you have to stress that, because they're constantly saying we work for the DNC, that we're Democratic infiltrators. It's like, it's hard to say that when we consistently say we're against the imperialism of the Democrats. We're third party and independent guys. So,
well, I mean, and this is really the problem, is that if all they're going to do is copy the Republican Party on attacking the idea of wokeness, then, I mean, we've already got a Republican Party. And how are you going to get enough of the people you need to get to win if you're not going to make, if you're not going to do everything you can to make it safe for Black people and gay people and trans people to join your party? Because remember, the harassment that people kept talking about does not suggest a safe environment for Black activists or gay or trans activists.
Right.
And that's something that really has to be looked at.
Any other comment you want to show?
This is a good thing to mention. Ryan Knight left the advisory council, and Paula Jean, of course, quit MPP after a bunch of other people were fired. And that's good to remember.
Jordan Sheridan, like, I saw the interview he did, the very brief interview with Nick, and Nick is yelling at Jordan, and Jordan's not having it. Eventually, had to cut him off and throw him off the air. But he was acting like a cult leader. This was something out of like Jamestown, Guyana, or something, you know?
So no, he's trying to act like the Democrats and the Republicans, which is, bullshit his way through it. And
you're a DNC infiltrator, Jordan, and we know that. And just because Ryan Grimm retweets some of Jordan's stuff, I mean, so what? Like, Ryan Grimm, yes, Ryan Grimm is too close to the Democratic Party. You and I agree with that. But he's done a lot to expose what happened to Assange. He's done some good journalism.
He's a very good journalist. I believe that he has compromised his integrity for the Democratic Party at several times. But I mean, that just means that I look at other sources too. If I'm looking at him, it doesn't mean that he's not a good journalist. It just means that you have to be careful. Sadly, you have to be careful with everybody. I'm not perfect. People shouldn't believe everything I say without, checking it out from time to time. I'm right a little more often than Joe Rogan, I hope. But I'm not an authority any more than he is.
What really broke the camel's back for me with Rogan, because I used to like him, was a lot of the racist stuff. And some of the stuff, I don't care what context you're showing me it in.
Yeah.
It's just things you don't say.
Well,
even if he was, let's say he was joking, right? You don't make racist jokes like that. So he's tried to be controversial. You don't, he went overboard on that.
I agree with this too. That was pandering to his base by Nick Brana. He baited Jordan.
And Jordan was more intelligent. I've been in touch with Jordan to go through with that. Eventually, he just threw him off because he was just trying to make it, to pander to his base, who are mostly just right-wing libertarians now, right? The type of ones that supported the truckers.
Well, yeah, the people who think of themselves as being smarter than everyone else and focused on unity, while basically demanding that people be willing, and
they're dividing through unity, and they're not focused on solidarity.
Exactly. They want people to be okay They want people to be okay with a lot of regressive white male attitudes. Let's be honest. They want people to be okay with a lot of really regressive attitudes held by well-off white people in the United States.
I just found out recently that literally there was a group of white guys, and probably some of them were Green Party guys from Florida, from what I heard, that were part of MPP, and they were like, we want to have the right to say the N-word. And the African-American members were like, no. And all of the African-American members that debated them were thrown off slack. Like, what the hell is this? It sounded almost like a Stalinist purge or something, like just because they're saying we don't want to be referred to as the N-word.
Yeah. And that was somehow a horrible thing. And I saw excerpts of a private conversation that someone made public. And somebody was saying to this friendly acquaintance of mine, You're the only person we think might be in good faith. And I'm, what? You think black people are in bad faith when they say they don't want white people to use the N-word? What's in better faith than that?
And the one white guy on the other side that they threw out because all the other whites they preferred to stay, they let him back in the next meeting.
Of course. But they're still harassing some of the black people who were involved with MPP, calling them liars if they dare say anything about their experience.
It sounds like people that leave a cult, people that leave Scientologists or something, and that are harassed.
It's the same mindset. Is you have to support the cause. And again, if you're just going to think like the Democrats and the Republicans and be that insular and tribal, what's the use?
And mark my words, Chris, I know how these people think. I did have a relationship with Nick at one point, a political relationship. He's going to be putting out a tweet soon because, he puts out tweets trashing Jordan.
Sure.
Now that we've had Lee on, and I love Lee, Lee, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that heard the show because Lee came on. I guarantee you within the next couple of days, Nick is going to tweet something trashing us. But you know what? When he does that, it's gonna give us some credibility.
Hey,
let him try.
Hey, that's his decision. What he does is up to him. I never really think about that one way or the other when I'm doing a show.
We're for truth, man. Whatever happens, happens. We'll take the consequences.
I just want to have good conversations. I mean, if I would do this show if no one watched, if I was having fun talking to the people I had on. I know more people watch it after it goes up than live. But that's cool.
A lot of that's algorithms, though. They're trying to silence voices like ours. You know that.
That's true. I'm just glad that some people do watch. I'm glad when they get views. I need to try to start promoting stuff again to keep those views up. But yeah, I know the algorithms are almost certainly working against us. And I know that they worked against us even more strongly when I tagged Lee, because it got fewer action with Lee's name in it than the usual announcement for the show.
That's crazy, but I'm sure the word will catch on soon. I'm sure Lee will retweet it.
Oh, I'm sure. But I mean, I believe that part of the algorithm that's doing the suppression is doing the suppression because of Lee's name. Because, I mean, it usually gets a little more action than that even. So that's something to think about. I don't pretend that I'm somehow a huge audience is being denied me, but but it's kind of funny to know how much traffic the typical promotion tweet gets and how much less the one for Lee got. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, he's known internationally as well.
Oh, no.
He's a respected voice. He was very successful on the Redacted Tonight show.
So
Isn't that ironic that his show at RT was called Redacted Tonight? Yeah. It's now been redacted by the imperialism.
It's funny. It is funny. And it's kind of, it's kind of funny because he is one of the top 3 or 4 names that I've had on. So for that to get less traction, it makes you think.
I mean, think about Noam Chomsky, for example, right? You know, I've interviewed him once and I've been in touch with him. Noam Chomsky, you know, New York Times called him the most important intellectual alive. But they'll never quote him.
Exactly.
They'll never bring him on to New York Times to have a story, you know, where he contributes to it. So, you know, they understand how important these figures are, but they won't give them a voice.
The biggest outlet that Noam Chomsky's been on is what? Democracy Now!, maybe?
I believe Chomsky's been on RT too. He certainly had people that were admirers of his that got on RT America and all that.
Sure. Yeah, that would be a bigger outlet then.
And actually, Democracy Now!, since Aaron Mate left it, they've had a more pro-imperialist narrative when it came to Syria. They do great on the domestic stories,
Democracy
on Standing
Now!
Rock, etc. But for the past few years, their foreign policy positions have kind of changed.
Democracy Now! Has always had some issues on some of the foreign policy stuff. I knew a conspiracy theorist who used to follow me on Twitter before I finally realized that they were just the wrong kind of conspiracy theorist at base. But I mean, one of the things that they were very, very set on was that Amy Goodman was a CIA agent.
Oh, God. You know, Amy Goodman's father and Chomsky are friends or were friends. I don't know if their father's still alive.
Well, you know, Pete Buttigieg's father and Cornell West were friends. That doesn't mean Buttigieg is a great guy.
Good point.
Kamala Harris's father.
Kamala Harris's father's a Marxist, and they hate each other. That's a whole different thing. He's a Marxist professor.
Yes.
I mean, he literally exposed her as a liar over the marijuana thing. I'd probably be buddies with her father if I ever met him and we hang out. He seems like a great guy. It's not his fault that his daughter turned out that way.
I would much rather hang out with Kamala Harris's father than with Kamala Harris.
We have some Jamaican ginger beers together. I mean, the guy is Jamaican.
I never assume anybody's taste based on that sort of thing.
Oh, I'm not trying to be racist. I'm just telling you.
I know you're not. I know you're not. But that was
I like Jamaican ginger beer. The reason why I mentioned Jamaican ginger beer is remember my throat last time?
Yeah.
So I would have grabbed my Jamaican ginger beer because I had to clear my throat up.
Oh, I know. I remember. Oh, let's see. Is there anything else I really wanted to?
But I think Kamala's identified more with her late mother, who's from India. And a lot of people from India that come here, I'm not trying to be stereotypical. I'm just saying a lot of them, not all of them, are right-wingers.
Well, and this is
supporters of the Hindu nationalists and Modi. You know, the anti-Gandhian Indians that migrated here. And a lot of their children are right-wingers, unfortunately.
There's a lot of dialogue, is the best way to put it, between high caste Hindu philosophy and white supremacists in the West.
Interesting.
They have a lot of the same enemies.
Especially the enemies that are Muslim.
Especially the enemies that are Muslim, but also the Chinese.
Oh, something I wanted to mention to Lee that I forgot, but I'll mention it to you. Did you hear about this vote of no confidence in the Pakistani parliament against Khan? And this at the same time that Khan is buying Russian oil. And they say that a lot of these groups, they could have CIA ties that are going after Khan.
And this is interesting to me. I mentioned this when you told me, and this is a good thing to actually mention a little bit on the show.
Yep.
The opposition to Khan is the Muslim League of Pakistan. The Muslim League of Pakistan is the socially conservative party that was aligned with Saudi Arabia against the U.S. During the 80s and 90s. Nawaz Sharif, the current leader of the Muslim League's brother, was prime minister after Benazir Bhutto was thrown out. He was one of the people who was very active in accusing people close to her of being corrupt. One of the people very active in using corruption charges to personally benefit his career.
I think Bhutto was killed for two reasons, because she was going to reveal where bin Laden was. She said in an interview, like almost exactly where he was. And he, of course, was protected by, different groups. And also because they wanted Brenner to become president. She was running for president at the time.
Well, they didn't want her to be, they didn't want her to be prime minister again or president.
That's what I meant, the PM, yeah.
She was somebody that was always considered dangerous by conservatives in Pakistan.
What was the name of the guy that was the PM of Pakistan during the invasion of Afghanistan? I'm talking about the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan.
You're talking about the PM or the president, the dictator?
The dictator.
That was Pervez Musharraf.
That's right, Musharraf. And so you said that the group throughout. You said that Musharraf was, of course, pro-U.S., but Musharraf was also connected with the Muslim League?
Well, so Musharraf was a military officer. Musharraf overthrew the Muslim League government in a CIA-backed coup. And Nawaz
my theory is that the Muslim League could have switched sides.
Well, and that's possible.
Because now they're working with the CIA, because, they always switch sides, and they're going against Khan as a retaliation, because look at the timing. This is the same time that he's buying Russian oil now, that Russia's looking to the east.
I'm not dismissing it. I'm raising some context. And Nawaz Sharif went into exile in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, because he was charged with corruption, right?
Yes, he was charged with corruption the same way that he had charged Bhutto's husband and son with corruption. And
interestingly enough, Bhutto's son, not husband, took over the party after her assassination.
Well,
there was some talk that actually the husband was corrupt.
Her husband was prime minister for a while after her assassination, largely because he was her husband.
He was very unpopular. They made the head of the party the son after that, right?
I don't know the details. You might be right. I would have to look it up. So I can't give a definitive answer. He was very unpopular. He was widely believed to be corrupt. The Pakistani writer that I have read on the subject of Pakistan's history believed that he was corrupt. He's widely considered to be corrupt in Pakistan and various business circles in Europe. So, yeah, I mean, he was not super popular. I don't know if he was actually corrupt or not, but his corruption was the stick that was used against Benazir Bhutto and is the reason that she went into exile. She was never accused of being personally corrupt, but she was accused of...
And where did Bhutto live for a time?
I'd have to look that up again.
Maybe England. I know that Khan lived in England at one point.
I don't know. I thought
her son was educated in England, I believe.
I don't know.
Even Assad was educated in England. He was a
dentist. Oh yeah, Assad. Oh yeah,
Assad didn't want to become president like his father, but he kind of was pushed into it after his father died.
Most of the Arab upper class go to school in either England or France.
Right, that's like a tradition, and that goes back to colonial times.
Well, yeah, that goes back to the Jordanians being part of the British mandate and the Lebanese being part of the French mandate. So a lot of Lebanese and Syro-Barians.
What was it called? The Sykes-Picot Agreement? There was an agreement between the British and the French to split up the Ottoman Empire after it fell.
I don't remember exactly. I don't remember every detail.
Well, you do know when the Ottoman Empire fell that the British and French took over most of those lands.
They did. And there was also a lot of territory that was expected to become part of Greece. And there is a lot of strong controversy about whether or not the Greek populations of specific cities were genocided by the Turks.
Well, look at the invasion of Cyprus. Cyprus used to be an entirely Greek island.
And as I said, there's a lot of discussion about that, a lot of controversy. Both sides accuse each other of genocide in what the Turks call the Turkish War of Independence, and what the Greeks just call the Turkish War.
I'm surprised they don't call it the Turkish War of Aggression.
Well, no, it is
they call the Northern War of Aggression, the anti-Confederacy movement or whatever.
Well, they call it the Turkish War of Independence because they pretend that it was Turkey fighting for independence against Britain and France, when in actuality it was a war between a group of former Ottomans who wanted to create a Turkish nation state, and Greeks, both native to some of those cities and Greeks from Greece on the mainland, coming in to try to take over what they thought was naturally Greek territory.
Well, Ataturk himself, the founder of the Turkish Republic at that time, was born in what is today Greek. His parents were Turks, but he was born in the western portion in what is today Greece.
Yes, and that was one of the reasons that he didn't want to let it go, because that was where he was from. But
I mean, it's ironic too if you look at Trotsky, because when he was negotiating with the Germans towards the end of World War I, the Germans were insistent on keeping Ukraine,
yes.
And that's where Trotsky was born. But luckily, he didn't lose his nationality after that.
Well, they had their own complicated nationality laws.
You said the Germans were on the run from Ukraine anyways later on, right?
There
was always a history with collaboration, especially with the rise of Nazis in Germany that inspired
Well, in
the so-called independence fighters in Ukraine that we mentioned earlier.
In 1917, first, the Soviet Union was forced to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with the Germans, and the Germans occupied Ukraine.
Right. First for a time, not for long, right? What, till like 1919, till the start of the Civil War?
1919, the start of the Civil War. When the Civil War started, the whites did a lot of recruiting in Ukraine. There was also a Ukrainian nationalist movement, and for a very short time, a Ukrainian republic.
The last bastion of the White Guards was in Crimea, I believe. That was the last point before they were finally completely thrown out.
Well, the very last bastion was Archangel, where the British took a lot of whites with them when they left.
Oh, yeah, the British and the Americans invaded the Soviet Union at one point as well.
Well, the British captured Archangel and held it.
Isn't that in the east? Isn't that closer to Siberia?
What?
Isn't Archangel closer to Siberia? It's in the east.
Archangel is on the western end, extreme north of St. Petersburg.
So it's the Arctic.
Yes, it's the Archangel is their furthest north base. It froze up until relatively recently when they were able to strengthen currents and things like that in the 80s. It froze. It traditionally froze up every year, and you couldn't get wooden ships out of it.
So it's probably close to Finland then, near Scandinavia.
Yeah, it's up there it's north of Scandinavia because of the way the world.
It's really up there. You're talking about near the North Pole.
Well, it's about as far north as you can go on the western end of Russia, and not just be in the ocean, in the Arctic Ocean.
Well, there's also a part of Russia that's between Belarus and Poland that's still there.
Yes, that's where Kaliningrad is.
Kaliningrad, that's what it's called.
Which is historically.
It was part of. Wasn't it part of Germany at one point?
Kronstadt. It's historically Kronstadt, and yes, it's a German. It was historically a German city. It was part of East Prussia, and East Prussia was annexed by Poland after World War II, and parts of it were also annexed by Russia.
What about Lithuania?
Lithuania was annexed by Russia after World War II. It was only got independence after World War I. It had been part of the Russian Empire before World
Because
War I.
Lithuania and Latvia are relatively new nations.
The
They were under
Germans,
either the Poles or the Germans or the
the
Russians.
Germans stayed in the Baltic republics, what's now the Baltic republics, longer than they stayed in Ukraine. And as a result, they were able to gain their independence with some German support. There's also a historical cultural exchange between the Baltics and Germany because of the Teutonic Knights and the fact that that there are a lot of there's a large.
Those knights were Vikings, weren't they?
There was historically a large German-speaking minority.
No, but I'm asking you, the Teutonic Knights, weren't they originally Viking?
Vikings. The Teutonic Knights fought the Vikings.
Oh, they were enemies. Okay.
And the Poles and the Prussian being the people Prussia is named after.
Right. Who
were not German, but Slavs.
Yeah, I heard that Prussian German or Eastern German dialect is similar to Russian.
Well, the Prussian, as they were called by Germans, were a Slavic group who were killed and or driven east when the Germans took over East Prussia.
You're talking about the Germanic tribes.
Yes. Well, yes. And the western part of historic Prussia, the kingdom of Prussia, what they called Royal Prussia, was part of Poland. So you had East Prussia, which was German. You had West Prussia, which was Polish, and then you had Brandenburg, the electorate of Brandenburg on the other side of Poland.
Which of the two tribes were bigger, Chris, the Visigoths or the Vandals?
It was not a matter of which were bigger. The Vandals ended up taking over more territory.
Yeah, the Vandals were more successful, right? I believe the Visigoths went to Spain and the Vandals went to Rome. And the Vandals were very successful with
the Vandals Rome. The Vandals went to North Africa, but came back.
They went as far as modern-day Tunis, right? Carthage.
They had there was a kingdom of the Vandals across all of North Africa.
I don't know, it was that big. You're talking about Vandalia?
Well, it was what the Romans just called the kingdom of the Vandals. I don't know what the Vandals called it, but it covered most of the North African coast until you got to the area across from Spain, which was nominally Roman for a little while, not very long.
I know the Visigoths were in Spain for a while.
And the Visigoths were in Spain until the Franks came and
my last name is Visigoth in origin, Suarez. There's a lot of Spanish names that are Visigoth if you go back far enough.
Well, no, anything with an AL, and I had a friend who lives in Spain, and it really offended them to be reminded, because some Spaniards are still a little bit racist this way.
The racist against their Moroccan cousins.
Any Spanish word that starts with AL, any Spanish last name that starts with AL, Alcazar, Alvarez, etc., comes from an Arabic root.
I know. Because L in Spanish is the, it's Al in Arabic.
Yes. And Al was specifically also a common part of Arabic patronymics that was incorporated into Christian surnames when families changed religions.
Yeah, the conversos, right? Not just there was no Muslims that stayed behind according to Christianity, or very few, the Moriscos. But the conversos were the Jews. There was a lot of Sephardic Jews that stayed behind.
There were lots of converts. Whether the converts were legitimate or not is another story.
The Moriscos hid out in the mountains, and they said they still practice Islam.
The
conversos, they stayed in the cities, and they had to show that they were Christian, right?
Well, that's the whole thing. The whole point of the Spanish Inquisition was to force the conversos and and the Moriscos to prove that they were really Christian and not Jewish or Muslim. But
The last bastion of the resistance was in Grenada, though. We know that in the south.
Grenada, the kingdom.
Yeah, well, it's pronounced. Yeah, that's right. It's pronounced Grenada in Spanish. So in Grenada, both the Muslims and the Jews united against the Christian Inquisitionists. At one point in the Golden Age, when it was Al-Andalus, where the word Andalusia comes from, which is the biggest province in Spain, Al-Andalus, when it was under Muslim control, the Christian and Jewish minority lived in prosperity. They call it the Golden Age.
Yes.
But later, when the Inquisition took over, it wasn't until 1492, the final push in Granada, that they finally subdued them.
Well, I mean, there was a significant minority among the Spanish aristocracy that sided with Napoleon in.
Well, they were the anti-Catholic groups. They were anti-Catholic when Napoleon entered Spain because he was ending the Spanish Inquisition.
They thought the Inquisition and the Catholic Church had destroyed Spanish civilization, and that Napoleon would give them the chance to restore Spanish civilization.
And of course, Napoleon deceived them. He did not want to do anything of the sort.
Well, what Napoleon wanted was more power for his family.
His brother became king of Spain.
But the Spanish part, the French party in the Spanish court preferred that anyway, because they essentially wanted to replace Inquisition law, which most people don't remember was still in force in Spain for a long time.
1800s, yeah.
Yes. It didn't actually end until after the first round of Carlist liberal wars.
Well, what I'm learning right now in my grad level class about the history of Spain and the transition from dictatorship to democracy is that there was laws in place like until the 1980s, even after Franco died, because a lot of the judiciary were Francoists, laws that said things like women couldn't get a passport, women couldn't sign a contract, just like really backward.
Well, it was because not so much Franco himself, but so many of the people around
the Catholics,
Franco,
the Opus Dei Catholics that he did alliance with,
the Phalangists,
and the Phalangists as well. But the Catholic Church in Spain was even more conservative than it was in Italy.
Well, that's why the Phalangist party was so right wing in Spain, even before Franco saw the opportunity to take over the whole Spanish right-wing movement and replace everybody else. Because the reason the Popular Front government was able to stop the Carlist uprising was because the Phalangists wouldn't support the Carlists, but both the Carlists and the Phalangists supported Franco.
Yeah, they were both right-wingers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the article where I'm critical? My brief article I wrote recently, I sent you, where I'm critical of the Popular Front and talk about real left populism.
That's good. I liked it. I kind of agree. I think that Stalin made a mistake by basically telling the Popular Front to crush their quote enemies unquote in Catalonia before fighting Franco.
And not only Catalonia, in Aragon, and all the front and all the fights against Franco, the leftists that were fighting Franco, rather than Stalin go after the Franco forces, he went after those forces that were fighting and demoralized the left as a result, united with the bourgeois, and did it in a fake populist type of way, almost a right-wing way.
Yeah, it was right-wing. Franco was a fascist.
No, what I mean is Stalin's policy. Well, yeah, I guess you could say it was kind of right-wing. It's just people that equate Stalin with Hitler. I don't think that's fair.
No, it's
they were ideologically different. They were both authoritarians, though. I can tell you that. So here's the problem. There are two bad things about Stalin. Well, three bad things about Stalin, which are independent of each other.
The first bad thing about Stalin is that he never completely shook the fact that he had studied to be a priest. And so he reversed
a Greek Orthodox priest,
a Russian Orthodox priest.
I'm sorry, Russian Orthodox.
But yeah, he studied to be a Russian Orthodox priest, and so he reversed Lenin's laws decriminalizing abortion and homosexuality. That wasn't great.
He worked with the Orthodox Church in the Great Patriotic War against the Nazis. Some people could say that might have been out of political necessity, but what you just mentioned was not politically necessary. The Bolsheviks already had power. The Bolsheviks already were passing progressive policies, and he made them more regressive as a result.
And it's important to understand that the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia has always been extremely conservative and anti-reform.
He also did things against gays. He didn't just go against women's rights. Stalin put gays in rehabilitation centers.
Yes, and required other communist countries to do the same. Some Castro defenders will say that Castro only locked people up because of Stalin. Though, to be fair, Castro apologized and said he...
Yes, and Stalin wasn't alive then. It was Khrushchev. But Khrushchev was not, I mean, I think it was by like the late 50s that Khrushchev started talking against Stalin. But by 1959, he wasn't really known as a anti-Stalinist yet. So because of Stalin's influence, despite Stalin being dead, that kind of prompted Fidel to do those things in the beginning.
Khrushchev was not considered an anti-Stalinist until he had to oppose the hard Stalinists in order to get them out of his government.
Well, he went against Beria, right? So his focus was Beria, who was one of Stalin's henchmen. But after that, the removal of Stalin's body from the Kremlin and all of that took some time.
He also had to get Molotov and Kaganovich and some other people out of the government he became an anti-Stalinist after he had to get rid of the last Stalin cronies.
And he also reconciled with Tito in Yugoslavia.
Yes.
But isn't that ironic that the Molotov cocktail is named after an ambassador? Molotov is the one that was negotiating with the Germans. He was an ambassador.
Well, that's why, though, because the Molotov cocktail was thrown at Russian tanks by Finns, who later became Nazi allies, but who at the time blamed Molotov for the war because of his treatment of Germany.
I knew that about the Finnish, but I didn't know that connection. That's interesting.
Yeah, the Molotov cocktail was thrown at Russian tanks by Finnish ski troops.
Wow, they literally skied down there to throw them. That's crazy.
Yes, they skied.
Plenty of snow in Finland.
They skied down the hill to throw.
The Finnish campaign was a disaster. If you read Khrushchev Remembers, and Khrushchev wrote it from his house arrest because, he was deposed in 1964.
Yes.
He talks about how he begged Stalin during the Finnish campaign to make a tactical retreat, and Stalin refused and continued on in World War II. A lot less Soviets would have died had Stalin had a more wise military strategy as a result. The Russians died bravely, but a lot of them died from friendly fire because he wouldn't let them retreat. If they retreated, they would fire on their own men. It was terrible.
He also killed there were also a lot of Finns killed by both Russians and Finnish soldiers because of the war. And the Finns had suffered so many losses from the Winter War, even though they won, that the first chance they got, they started a new war against the Soviet Union, allied with the Nazis, called the Continuation War.
Well, also the government in Finland were very right-wing as well. They had similar ideological lines as the Nazis.
Well, it's important to remember that even today, the greatest Finn ever in all their polls was the man who led the Finnish White Army to victory over the Finnish Red Army in the Finnish Civil War.
And you mean the voting polls, not the Polish people?
Yes, the voting polls, Finnish polls.
It's confusing, right? We're talking about where the polls were in the Baltic area. Yeah. Well, that's another thing. Somebody said the other day that Ukraine was in the Balkans. It's not. It borders the Balkans. The Balkans is where Yugoslavia used to be. Yeah. It's like saying that Albania was part of Yugoslavia. They'll get offended. You can't say that. If you tell a Ukrainian they're in the Balkans, they'll get pissed.
Albania has never been part of Yugoslavia.
I know, but people claim that, but they neighbored them. They were political allies. They weren't the same. I mean, there was Albanian ethnic people in Kosovo, which was part of Yugoslavia, but it's not the same thing.
And in Macedonia, which was part of Yugoslavia.
Macedonia was part of Yugoslavia. It's right by Croatia. It's like between Croatia and Greece is Macedonia. Yeah.
Yep.
The Republic of Macedonia today. It's a Slavic one.
And the Republic of Macedonia was.
It's like saying Moldova. Moldova was part of Romania, or is still part of it. And then there's the Republic of Moldova. But Moldova was never part of Yugoslavia. People get Macedonia and Moldova mixed up all the time.
Well, and to make it more complicated, the modern Macedonia isn't the historical Macedonia.
No, I know. The city where Alexander the Great was born is in Greek Macedonia. It's not part of the Republic.
Exactly. And most of historical Macedonia is in what's Greek now, but was inhabited by Germans then. The Macedonians
Well, Alexander was half Greek. His mother was Greek. Yes. She was from Olympia. His father was a Macedonian. He had blonde hair, but he had probably both like Germanic and Greek blood.
Yes, the Macedonians were Greek-speaking Germans who had married heavily with Greeks. They weren't pure. They weren't what Hitler would call pure Germans anymore. But the same time,
the Nazis were very sympathetic to the Greeks. They considered them like their Aryan cousins, not Aryan, but like cousins of the Aryans.
Well, it's the same sort of thing it's the same sort of relationship that the Romans had with the Greeks. They considered the Greeks the progenitors of their civilization, essentially.
Well, they said that Rome was started by the survivors of Troy, but they also were heavily influenced by the Greeks. There's even some linguistic similarities, them both being from the Eastern Mediterranean. It's not that Latin came from the Greeks, but it's similar. But their religion was entirely based on the Greeks. They just changed the names of the gods.
For all of the Republic, for all of the Roman Republic, the sign of being educated was speaking Greek. The entire
Julius Caesar was fluent in Greek. He spoke Greek to Cleopatra.
All of the business of the Senate until I can't remember which emperor. I'd have to look it up. But for many years, all the business of the Senate was done in Greek because they were educated people who,
just like the Catholic Church had all their business in Latin for a while.
Yes, exactly.
In all the different countries.
Exactly.
Until the Vatican II.
Yes.
As a number 2.
and that's something that's worth knowing, that the Romans spoke Greek in their Senate until one of the emperors changed it to Latin. And the reason that emperor changed it to Latin was because he said everybody's Greek was shite anyway. So
what was the name of that famous Roman guy? It wasn't Cato, but he was from Cato's time. He was also around when Julius Caesar was around. There's a famous, was it Seneca? The Greek guy who translated all the Roman guy who translated all the Greek Catholics to Latin. Was it Seneca?
Well, that's much, 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 much later.
Then it wasn't Seneca. There was a Roman guy who was around at the same time as Julius Caesar. I'm not saying the same age, but just around the same time. And he translated famously the Greek classics into Latin.
Well, he
was an enemy of Julius Caesar, just like Cato was.
There were several famous translators. Cicero,
that's the one. Cicero was the first to translate.
Cicero did translations of Greek literature into
the classics, the philosophers, Aristotle, all that. He translated into Latin. That was Cicero. Yeah, and Cicero was an enemy of Julius Caesar because he didn't like his populism, much like Cato.
But he was an early supporter of Augustus, ironically.
Well, yes. I mean, Augustus reversed a lot of his great uncle's populist policies. I talk about that in my article.
But then Augustus also betrayed Cicero to Mark.
Well, yeah, because he never forgot he was an enemy of his great uncle.
Yeah,
who was Julius Caesar.
That's true. But yeah, it's kind of funny how all those alliances work out.
You know who was more of a populist, Chris? And tell me if you disagree. Mark Antony. Had Mark Antony won the Civil War and defeated Octavian, he was called at the time, Caesar Augustus, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, his great nephew. Had Mark Antony had a successful naval battle off the coast of Egypt and defeated his forces and took over as a leader of both East and West of the Roman Empire. Don't you think there would have been opportunity for more populist policy like Julius was pushing for?
So it's worth understanding that at the time the Civil War officially became a full all-out civil war, Mark Antony was married to Cleopatra.
Yep.
And had made agreements with her that split up large amounts of Roman territory between their various children as kings and queens.
The Byzantine Empire would have became a protectorate of Egypt.
Well, so here's the thing, and this is something, is that if Antony had won the Civil War, by that point, by the time the Civil War happened, Antony wasn't a populist anymore. All of Antony's old populist supporters had left him and gone home and retired. Publius Ventidius and the historian, the guy who wrote all of the Julius Caesar friendly histories for Augustus and who is mentioned in I, Claudius as Livy's rival. Oh,
that's interesting, though, that the older populace that fought alongside Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, they retired. So Mark Antony kind of abandoned that. That's interesting.
And it wasn't just that they retired; they left him to retire. They wouldn't have retired.
They wouldn't fight alongside him anymore
if they hadn't have lost faith in his leadership, basically.
Right. And it was also a huge scandal that he married Cleopatra because she was, they would call her a barbarian, right?
Augustus deliberately made it a scandal.
Julius took her as a lover, but didn't marry her.
Well, there was a whole bunch of stuff going on.
I mean, it was like when Alexander married Roxana, the Persian. It was a huge scandal to the Macedonians. They wanted there to be a pure Macedonian heir. And
both Cleopatra and Roxana ended very badly.
Oh, I know. It was tragic. A Greek tragedy, you could say.
And Roxana didn't have nearly the self-agency about it and was never given the chance to have the self-agency about it that Cleopatra did.
Oh, yeah. Cleopatra ruled the nation. She was a lot more successful than Roxana. But it's been about an hour and a half, Chris. So I want to thank you, man, for giving me the opportunity to interview one of my heroes, Lee Camp. I think the show went very well.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for joining us. I am going to take next week off, folks. Next Tuesday is my birthday.
Happy early birthday.
Thanks. I will be 45. I feel old. I remember when I thought I was going to be 20 forever. And that's certainly not the case. But no, thanks very much for getting Lee on the show. I really appreciate it, Alex. Thanks for joining us. All our guests and Alex, you all have a great night, and I'll tweet at you.